Elijah had always been the quiet type. He wasn't one to speak much, preferring the solitude of his thoughts or the calmness of books. At the age of 14, he had already experienced more in life than most kids his age. His family had just moved to a new neighborhood, a mostly suburban area that felt foreign to him. Coming from a different part of the city, Elijah was used to being around people who looked like him. But here, in this new place, he was one of the few black kids in the area. That was something he'd never experienced before. He didn't mind being different, but he also knew that people often treated others who were different in strange ways. The sun was shining brightly as Elijah stepped outside that morning. It was the first real day of summer, and the air smelled fresh, filled with the scent of blooming flowers. He had always loved this time of year. He could feel the excitement bubbling up inside him as he thought about his first visit to the community pool. It wasn't just about the pool itself, though, it was about the chance to finally be a part of something, to fit in with the other kids his age. Elijah had heard about how fun the pool could be, the laughter, the games, and the kids making friends. It was supposed to be an easy way to meet people and enjoy the summer. When he arrived at the pool, the first thing that caught his eye was how big it was. It looked nothing like the small, crowded pool he used to go to back home. This one had multiple lanes for swimming, a diving board, and even a shallow area for little kids to play. Elijah took a deep breath and stood at the edge, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't the best swimmer, but he'd been practicing at home. His dad, a former martial artist, had taught him to swim and to stay calm in the water. It was one of the many lessons Elijah had learned from him, the art of staying composed, no matter the situation. As he walked toward the entrance, he noticed a group of kids sitting on the grass near the poolside. They were laughing and talking loudly, some in their swimsuits and others in shorts and t-shirts. Elijah hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether he should approach them. He had never been the type to make the first move. Instead, he quietly walked past them and found a spot near the edge of the pool, away from the group. The first few minutes were awkward. Elijah didn't know what to do. He sat by the side of the pool, dipping his feet into the cool water, and watched as other kids swam and played. He tried to ignore the nervous feeling in his stomach, reminding himself that it was just a pool, just like any other. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. As the day wore on, the group of kids by the pool began to take notice of him. Elijah felt their eyes on him, but he tried not to let it bother him. He turned his attention back to the water, trying to relax. But the kids, who were now being loud and boisterous, began to move closer to him. One of them, a tall boy with blonde hair and a cocky smile, walked right up to Elijah. His name was Kyle, and Elijah could tell from the way he looked at him that he had already made up his mind about him. "Well, well," Kyle said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do we have here? Another kid who doesn't know how to swim." Elijah looked up, meeting Kyle's eyes. He didn't respond. His dad had taught him to be respectful, to keep his composure, and not to engage with people who were trying to provoke him. But Kyle wasn't done. "I bet you've never even been to a real pool before, huh?" Kyle continued. "Probably don't even know how to do a cannonball." The other kids, a mix of boys and girls, began to snicker, their laughter echoing in the air. Elijah could feel his heart racing, but he kept his face calm. He didn't want to show them they had gotten to him. His mind flashed back to the countless hours he'd spent training with his dad, learning discipline, learning to stay focused and in control. This was just another test. "I'm fine," Elijah replied softly, keeping his voice steady. He didn't want to draw attention to himself, but Kyle wasn't letting up. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Elijah. "What, you think you're too good for us?" Kyle said, his voice rising in volume. "You don't belong here." The other kids were watching now, and Elijah could feel their eyes on him. The tension in the air was thick, and he knew this was about to escalate. He could either let them keep pushing him around, or he could stand up for himself. "Go away," Elijah said quietly, his voice calm but firm. He wasn't angry, just determined to end this peacefully. But Kyle smirked, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "Go away," Kyle repeated, his eyes narrowing. "Why don't you make me?" Before Elijah could respond, Kyle shoved him lightly in the shoulder. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The group of kids laughed, egging Kyle on. The shove wasn't just a push, it was a statement. Kyle was testing him, seeing how far he could go before Elijah would react. Elijah stood up slowly, taking a deep breath. He didn't want to fight, but he also wasn't going to let anyone push him around. He squared his shoulders and looked Kyle directly in the eye. Without a word, he stepped back and prepared to walk away, but Kyle wasn't finished. He took a step forward and shoved Elijah again, this time harder. The force of the shove knocked Elijah off balance, sending him stumbling toward the edge of the pool. For a moment, time seemed to slow. His feet slid on the slick tiles, and he tried to catch himself, but he was falling. With a splash, Elijah hit the water, the coldness of it shocking him for just a second. He quickly surfaced, gasping for air, but the bullies weren't done. "Well, look at that. He can't even keep his balance," one of the other kids laughed. Elijah tensed. The water around him felt cold and unforgiving, and he could see the kids smirking, waiting for him to struggle. They didn't realize that this was no ordinary water to him. Elijah wasn't like the other kids. His father had taught him not just to swim, but to survive in any situation, no matter the odds. He wasn't scared. He knew exactly what to do. But for now, Elijah simply focused on staying calm. He had to stay composed, no matter what. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest as he floated in the pool, trying to steady himself. The shock of falling into the water had worn off, and now he was fully aware of the situation. The group of kids on the side of the pool was still laughing, their voices echoing in the air, filled with mockery. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. But Elijah knew he couldn't stay in the water forever. He had to get out. He took a deep breath and pushed himself to the edge of the pool. His hands gripped the smooth tiles, and with a swift movement, he pulled himself up and out of the water. The coolness of the air hit his skin, but his focus was on the group of kids standing around the pool. They were all staring at him now, their laughter fading into silence. Elijah didn't react to the silence. He kept his face calm, just as his father had taught him. His dad always said that being in control of your emotions was one of the most important things you could do in any situation. Elijah knew that if he allowed his anger to take over, he would be no different than the bullies. But he also knew he had to make it clear that he wouldn't back down. Kyle, the leader of the group, took a step forward. His cocky smile hadn't faded. In fact, he seemed to take pleasure in watching Elijah stay quiet, like he was daring him to do something. "You know," Kyle began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I didn't expect you to be such a loser. Falling into the pool like that. What, you think you're too good for this place?" Elijah's mind raced, but he didn't show it. He just stood there, his arms at his sides, dripping wet. He wasn't going to play into Kyle's game. He wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing that he had affected him. "I'm not a loser," Elijah said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm just not interested in playing games with people who don't know how to respect others." Kyle's face twisted into a sneer. "Respect? You think I'm going to respect someone like you? Someone who can't even stay on his feet?" The words stung, but Elijah refused to let them show. He had learned from a young age that words were often just noise. It was the actions that mattered. And right now, the action was clear: these kids weren't just making fun of him. They were testing him, seeing how far they could push him before he snapped. But Elijah wasn't going to snap. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. "Do you feel better now?" Elijah asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Is that what you wanted, to make fun of me?" Kyle took a step back, clearly surprised by Elijah's calm response. For a moment, the group of kids fell into an uncomfortable silence. But then, Kyle's arrogance returned. He wasn't going to back down, not in front of his friends. Without warning, Kyle pushed past Elijah and splashed into the pool, causing a large wave of water to splash onto the side of the pool. He was trying to provoke Elijah again, but this time, Elijah was ready. His body tensed, not out of anger, but out of focus. He had to stay calm. His father had always told him that when someone tried to provoke you, it wasn't about winning or losing, it was about staying in control. Elijah took a step back from the pool, making sure he was a few feet away from the edge. He didn't need to get any closer. Kyle, on the other hand, swam towards him, his movements exaggerated and playful. He was showing off, trying to make Elijah look weak in front of the others. "I don't know what your deal is, man," Kyle said, splashing water toward Elijah. "You think you're all special or something? Just because you've been trained to swim doesn't mean you're better than me." Elijah remained silent. He didn't need to explain himself. Kyle's words were just noise. Then, something happened that Elijah hadn't expected. One of the other kids, a girl named Jenna, spoke up. She had been one of the ones laughing earlier, but now, there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Kyle, maybe you should just leave him alone. He didn't do anything to you." Kyle turned to her with a sharp look. "What? You're sticking up for him now? You think he's some kind of hero?" Jenna didn't back down. "I'm just saying. It's getting a little old. You don't have to be a jerk to him." The words seemed to have an effect on Kyle. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Elijah saw it. There was a flicker of doubt in Kyle's eyes. But then, his pride kicked back in. He wasn't going to let anyone see him back down. Kyle took another step closer to Elijah. "You're lucky I don't make you regret showing up here," he threatened. Elijah could feel the tension building in the air. The group of kids was watching now, their eyes shifting between him and Kyle. For a moment, it felt like everyone was holding their breath. Elijah was standing at the edge, but he wasn't going to let Kyle push him around. Not anymore. Instead of reacting with anger, Elijah took another step back, his mind clear. He didn't need to fight. He didn't need to prove anything. But he did need to stand his ground. He wasn't going to let Kyle continue to treat him like this, not now, not ever. "You don't scare me, Kyle," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I don't need to fight you to make my point." Kyle's smirk faltered for a moment, and then he shook his head, turning away. The other kids stood in silence, unsure of what to do next. Jenna, still standing by the pool, gave Elijah a small nod of respect. For the first time, Elijah felt like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to prove himself. The bullies were no longer laughing. They had underestimated him, and now they were unsure of what to do. Elijah had shown them something they hadn't expected: control, focus, and strength without the need for violence. As Kyle and his friends walked away, Elijah stood by the pool, letting out a slow breath. He wasn't sure if this was the end of the bullying, but he knew one thing for certain: he was stronger than they thought. And no matter what happened next, he wouldn't let them break him. The next day, the tension at the pool was still thick. Elijah knew the bullies hadn't forgotten what had happened, and that made him uneasy. But he couldn't let fear control him. His dad always told him that when people try to bring you down, the best thing you can do is stay calm and keep your dignity. That was what Elijah planned to do today: stay calm. He arrived early at the pool, hoping to avoid any more confrontations. The pool was quiet, only a few people scattered around. Elijah changed into his swimsuit and walked over to the edge of the pool. He dipped his toes in, the cool water feeling good against his skin. He needed a moment to relax and forget about the kids who had made his life difficult yesterday. But as the minutes passed, more kids began to arrive. He recognized Kyle and his friends almost immediately. They walked in, laughing and talking loudly, as usual. Elijah tried to ignore them. He didn't want to let them ruin his peace, but he could feel their eyes on him, just like the day before. Kyle, as if on cue, made his way over to Elijah. His usual cocky grin was in place, but today, there was something different about the way he looked at Elijah. It wasn't just the usual taunts, it was something deeper, something that felt more personal. Kyle stopped just short of Elijah and folded his arms across his chest. "Well, look who it is," Kyle said, his voice carrying across the pool. "The kid who thinks he's better than everyone else." Elijah didn't say anything at first. He wasn't going to give in to the provocation. Instead, he focused on the water in front of him, the small ripples moving with the gentle breeze. But Kyle wasn't done. He took another step forward, trying to get Elijah's attention. "You think you're special just because you know how to swim? You think you can take me on?" Kyle's voice grew louder, drawing more attention from the other kids. They turned their heads, watching the scene unfold. Elijah could feel their eyes on him, but he remained still, letting Kyle do all the talking. "I don't want to fight you," Elijah said quietly, his voice calm. "I'm here to swim, not to argue." Kyle laughed, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was bitter, full of spite. "Swim? You think you're just gonna swim your way out of this? You can't avoid me forever, Elijah. I'll make you regret it." He smirked as though he had already won. Elijah felt the weight of the situation, but he refused to be intimidated. He could see the other kids watching closely now, waiting to see how he would react. Some of them had stopped their games and were standing still, their attention solely on the confrontation. The moment felt like it was stretching on forever. But instead of backing down, Elijah stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice or shout. He simply spoke, his words carrying a weight that surprised even Kyle. "Listen, Kyle, I don't need to prove anything to you," Elijah said, his tone still calm but filled with conviction. "I'm not here for your approval. I'm here to do what I love, and if that's too much for you, then that's your problem, not mine." For a brief moment, there was silence. Even the other kids seemed to hold their breath, unsure of how Kyle would react. Kyle looked at Elijah, his expression hardening. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, and for a second, it seemed like he didn't know how to respond. It wasn't what he expected. But Kyle wasn't going to back down that easily. He took another step forward, looking more determined than ever. "You're not the only one who's tough around here," he said, his voice filled with arrogance. "We're going to see if you're really as tough as you think." Elijah could see the challenge in Kyle's eyes, and for a split second, he wondered if this was the moment it would all go too far. But then he remembered what his father had taught him: control. Always control. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him to stay calm, to stay focused. "I'm not fighting you, Kyle," Elijah said again, his voice steady. "But I won't let you bully me either." Kyle paused. The silence between them was deafening. The other kids, still watching intently, seemed to sense that something big was about to happen. But to Elijah's surprise, Kyle stepped back. There was a flash of something: frustration, maybe, or confusion in Kyle's face. It was like he was trying to decide whether to push things further or back off. Kyle opened his mouth to say something, but then he stopped himself. His eyes flickered to the group of kids watching them. The silence stretched on for another moment, and then Kyle looked away. He let out a frustrated grunt, turning on his heel and walking off. Elijah watched him go, a sense of relief washing over him. He had stood his ground, and in the end, it was Kyle who had backed down. The other kids slowly began to disperse, going back to their own activities. Some of them even gave Elijah a few sideways glances, unsure of what to think. It was like they didn't know whether to cheer for him or just stay out of it. Elijah took a deep breath and walked back to the edge of the pool. He wasn't looking for recognition, but he couldn't deny that there was a small part of him that felt proud. He had faced Kyle's challenge without fear, without anger, and without raising his fists. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about standing firm and knowing when to walk away. He climbed into the pool and let the cool water wash over him, feeling the tension melt away. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had shown them what mattered: not strength in fighting, but strength in holding your ground. As Elijah swam laps across the pool, he knew this wouldn't be the last time he faced a challenge. But with each stroke, he felt more confident in himself, more sure that he could handle whatever came his way. The bullies hadn't broken him. And they never would. The days passed, and the atmosphere at the pool seemed to shift. Elijah noticed that things weren't the same as they had been before. The bullying had slowed down, but there was still a lingering tension. Kyle and his friends no longer openly taunted him, but there was a coldness in the air whenever they crossed paths. They didn't dare to say anything to his face anymore, but Elijah could sense that they were still waiting for him to slip up. Still, he stayed focused on his own goals. The pool was a place for him to relax and get better at swimming, not to engage in petty confrontations. Elijah didn't come to the pool every day, but on the days he did, he made sure to keep his distance from the troublemakers. He focused on his swimming, his breathing, and his strokes, letting the rhythm of the water calm him. He liked the feeling of weightlessness, the way the water held him up, making him feel strong and free. It was the one place where he could escape from everything else. But it seemed like Kyle and his crew were never too far behind. They would sometimes watch from a distance, whispering to each other, always keeping an eye on Elijah. Elijah ignored them, determined not to let them get to him. He had learned that the best way to deal with bullies wasn't to fight back physically, but to show them that their words had no power over him. Then, one afternoon, things took a turn. Elijah was swimming laps, his body moving through the water with ease, when he noticed Kyle and his friends standing by the edge of the pool. They were whispering among themselves, glancing over at him. Elijah kept swimming, but he could feel their eyes on him, waiting for something. His heart started to beat a little faster, but he shook it off, trying to stay focused. It wasn't until he finished his last lap and started to make his way to the poolside that Kyle made his move. He stepped forward, blocking Elijah's path as he climbed out of the water. "You're getting pretty good at this, huh?" Kyle said, his tone cold but not quite as mocking as before. There was something different about him today. Elijah had expected another round of taunts, but Kyle's words weren't as sharp. Instead, it felt almost like a challenge. Elijah raised an eyebrow, his mind racing. "What do you want, Kyle?" Kyle didn't answer immediately. He looked over his shoulder at his friends, who were standing a little further back, watching the scene unfold. There was a moment of hesitation before Kyle turned back to Elijah, a strange look in his eyes. "I've been thinking," Kyle said slowly, "maybe we've been wrong about you." Elijah's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Kyle glanced at his friends again, and this time, one of the other boys, named Adam, stepped forward. "We're sorry, man," Adam said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "We didn't know what we were doing. It's not right, you know, treating you like that." Elijah stared at them, not sure if he had heard right. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The kids who had made his life miserable only a few days ago were now apologizing? He didn't know how to respond. This was not what he had expected at all. "Why are you saying this now?" Elijah asked, still trying to process what was happening. "After everything that's happened." Kyle shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know. It just doesn't feel right anymore. We were just messing around, but I guess we went too far. And you didn't do anything back. You didn't fight us. That kind of threw us off." Elijah didn't say anything for a long moment. He had never expected an apology, especially not from Kyle. Part of him wanted to keep his distance, to stay away from these kids who had made him feel like an outsider. But another part of him realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when things could change, when he didn't have to carry the weight of their cruelty anymore. He took a deep breath, his mind steady. "I'm not asking for an apology," Elijah said, his voice calm but firm. "I just want to be left alone. I'm not here to fight or prove anything. I just want to swim, and that's it." Kyle nodded, his face softening a little. "I get it. I do. And I'm sorry for everything we said. We were just idiots." Adam looked up at Elijah, his face sincere. "Yeah, we didn't know how much it would affect you. We won't bother you again." For a moment, it felt like everything had changed. Elijah's chest felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. He didn't have to worry about looking over his shoulder every time he came to the pool. He could just enjoy it for what it was, a place to be free. "Thanks," Elijah said quietly, looking at both Kyle and Adam. "But just remember, it's about respect. If you can't give that, we don't have anything to talk about." Kyle gave him a nod of understanding. "Fair enough." With that, the group turned and walked away, leaving Elijah standing by the poolside, still processing the conversation. He didn't know if he could completely forgive them yet, but he wasn't going to hold a grudge. He had learned that standing his ground wasn't just about not letting people push him around. It was also about finding peace for himself, even when others might try to drag him into conflict. Elijah stepped back into the pool, feeling the cool water surround him once again. As he swam, he couldn't help but notice that the other kids seemed to treat him differently now. There were no more whispers or snide remarks. Instead, there was quiet respect. They had seen how Elijah had handled himself with dignity, control, and strength. And that was enough. The summer days rolled by, and Elijah's visits to the pool became more and more peaceful. It was hard to believe how much things had changed in such a short time. The tension that had once filled the air seemed to disappear, replaced by a calm that Elijah wasn't used to. He could now enjoy his time swimming without looking over his shoulder. The bullies, once so relentless, had faded into the background, and Elijah found himself growing more comfortable in the space he had once feared. He had won more than just a battle. He had gained something far more valuable: respect. On a bright Saturday morning, Elijah arrived at the pool earlier than usual. The water shimmered under the sun, inviting him in. There was something peaceful about the early mornings, a kind of quiet that allowed him to clear his mind before the day got too busy. He stripped down to his swimsuit, feeling the familiar weight of his training. The hours he'd spent learning how to control his body, learning how to swim with precision, had all led him to this moment, a moment where he was in control, not just of his body but of his peace of mind. As he stepped into the cool water, he could hear the sounds of the pool slowly filling up with other kids. But today, it was different. There was no crowd of kids gossiping or snickering. Instead, some of them, including Kyle and Adam, were walking towards the pool with their usual smiles. Elijah could feel their eyes on him, but there was no malice in their gaze this time. They had apologized, and now, it felt like things had shifted permanently. Kyle waved at Elijah from a distance, an easy smile on his face. "Hey, Elijah," he called, his voice friendly. Elijah paused in the middle of his stroke, surprised but pleased by the greeting. He hadn't expected things to change so quickly, but here they were. Kyle and his friends were actually acknowledging him in a way that was more than just tolerance, it was genuine friendliness. Elijah nodded back, a small smile on his face. "Hey, Kyle," Elijah said, keeping his voice calm. "How's it going?" Kyle stepped closer to the pool. "Good, good. We were just talking. Some of us are planning to do some laps later. You in?" Elijah hesitated for just a moment. It wasn't that he didn't want to join in. It was just that he had always kept to himself, never really mixing with the others. But today felt different, and for the first time, he considered the idea of actually joining in. He didn't have to keep his distance anymore. He had earned their respect, and now, they were offering him the same. "I think I'll join," Elijah said, finally deciding to swim alongside them. The idea of swimming together felt natural, as if the distance between him and the others had vanished. The group of kids, including Kyle and Adam, joined Elijah at the edge of the pool, each ready to start their laps. As they began swimming, there was an ease to it. Elijah found himself in a rhythm, his strokes smooth and controlled, just like his father had taught him. Kyle and the others seemed to follow his pace, their earlier hesitation replaced by a comfortable camaraderie. For the first time, Elijah felt like he was truly part of the group. They weren't just tolerating him, they were respecting him, and it felt right. He didn't have to fight or prove anything. His quiet strength had spoken for him, and now they recognized it. As the day went on, the group began to relax and talk more freely, their conversations flowing easily. Kyle asked about Elijah's martial arts training, clearly interested in the skills that Elijah had used to stand his ground. Elijah was happy to share, but he didn't brag about it. Instead, he talked about how much he enjoyed the discipline of it all, how it wasn't just about fighting but about learning to stay calm, to control his movements, and to be aware of his surroundings. "I've been doing it for years," Elijah said, a hint of pride in his voice. "It's not about being the strongest. It's about knowing when to act, when to stay calm, and how to protect yourself." "That's pretty cool," Adam said, nodding. "I always thought martial arts was just about throwing punches, but it sounds like it's way more than that." Elijah smiled, appreciating that they were taking an interest. "Yeah, it's all about focus and control. If you can control yourself, you can handle anything life throws at you." As the afternoon wore on, the group spent more time together, swimming and chatting, the mood light and easy. Elijah had never imagined he would find a place here, in this group. He had come to the pool for peace, and in the end, he had found something even more valuable, acceptance. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the pool, Elijah took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. The boy who had been shoved into the water, humiliated and alone, was now a part of something bigger. He had been tested, not just by the bullies but by his own fears, and he had come out stronger for it. Elijah didn't need to fight to prove himself anymore. His actions had spoken louder than any words could. And now, as he swam alongside his peers, there was a feeling of belonging that he had never felt before. It wasn't just about surviving the bullying, it was about moving past it, growing from it, and showing the world who he truly was. The water felt good against his skin, the smooth rhythm of his strokes a reminder that he had found his peace. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. And as he swam with the group, laughing and chatting, Elijah realized that he had finally found the place he had been searching for, not just at the pool, but within himself. The bullies who had once made him feel like an outsider were now nothing more than distant memories. They had underestimated him, but in the end, they had helped him discover his true strength. Elijah had learned that it wasn't about the fight. It was about how you carried yourself, how you handled adversity, and how you stayed true to who you were. And with that lesson, Elijah knew he was ready for whatever came next. He had proven to himself that he could handle anything, with dignity and strength. And that was enough.